Welcome to Scream Therapy. I'm your host, Jason Schreurs. In October of 2018, I found myself in the hospital, sitting across from a psychiatrist who was telling me I had bipolar. I was sent home with a bunch of medication and laid on the couch for a week. I had my iTunes library on shuffle, trying to shake the hornet's nest from my head. Ever since I was a kid, I've been using loud music as a form of therapy. Punk rock and mental health have always been connected. This podcast looks at that connection through the lens of different guests. This is Scream Therapy. Grief is earth-shattering, a deep, intense depression that fades in time, but never goes away. When Seattle musician Rocky Votolato lost his child, Keenan, in a car accident, he found himself questioning everything. Could he carry on? Would he ever pick up his guitar again? Despite his profound loss, his creative expression did slowly reemerge, louder, stronger. Art reflects life, and Rocky's latest project, Suzzallo, was his way of tracing back his musical history and the time he spent with Keenan. We never get over grief, but there is hope. There is honoring legacy. There is celebrating the lives of those who have passed by celebrating ourselves, the strength and love and joy in our lives, because those no longer with us would want us to be happy.
Hi, my name's Rocky Votolato. I'm a Seattle-based musician. I started playing in punk bands when I was in high school. I had moved up to Seattle in the early 90s, and I went to so many great shows that kind of were very formative for me around that time. Saw bands like Jawbreaker. I saw Nirvana at that time, and gosh, there was just so much happening in Seattle. That music kind of defined me and was a huge part of my life. There was a huge all ages movement at that time that I was a big part of. About 3 years ago, I went through a personal tragedy that changed every aspect of my life. My child died in a car accident. So they were 22 at the time. It's very much changed the trajectory of my life and how I relate to art and music and everything.
And you've put out, I believe, like 9 or 10 solo albums and been super prolific in music and been in some really cool hardcore bands, post-hardcore bands over the years. It's defined your life and transformed your life. But being hit with such a huge tragedy and loss, how did that affect the way that you look at your music? And I would think that you had a period where you probably couldn't do it at all.
Absolutely. Yeah, there was about probably, I guess this was December of 2021 when that happened. And it was, I guess, shattered was the word that came to mind most often. It's completely shattered our life. It was probably about 6 months before I even picked up a guitar. At that time, I basically just couldn't really function in life. I had to take care of a lot of the details for the memorial service. And, there's so many legal details that you don't realize. I mean, we were completely unprepared because you just don't think that someone's going to pass away at 22. It was so unexpected, and it just changed every aspect of my wife, April, and I's life and our daughter. And so after about 6 months of the initial shock of everything, and in that period, I was basically just on the floor a lot. I was crying all day long or just barely able to function. And I noticed my memory was really impacted. I had a really hard time. It almost felt like a traumatic brain injury to
Yeah.
me. Even following conversations was difficult. I just didn't have any short-term memory. I couldn't keep up with the conversations. So luckily that all went away. And I've read now that that's in some ways your brain trying to protect you from just the shock and the intensity of the grief. But that did start to subside. And when I did pick up my guitar, I remember the very first song I wrote. It was for Suzzallo, for the new project. Yeah, I was at a cabin with a buddy on a small island in the San Juans. You have to take a little ferry to get there. And anyway, I was playing this song and it was so amazing. Like that's when things finally started to, I guess, to be able to express some of that through art. And that was just really good for me.
I'm visualizing you having that pull towards the guitar, and maybe it was the right time, right place for you. Do you remember the feeling of that pull? And obviously, you're a musician. This is your life, and you would have gotten back to it
Yeah.
regardless. But what was that moment of pull that you felt?
Yeah, it was great. I mean, I was listening to a lot of the Beatles at the time, which was it's like nothing like what I actually ended up creating, but I was playing Beatles songs and then somehow I just started writing again. And I think I always kind of had this viewpoint from before, but I think it's been strengthened and reaffirmed by what I went through. I really do think art can help people so much who've gone through these kind of experiences, so that's something I wanted to say here today is just like, if anyone is going through deep grief or trauma of any kind, loss, whether it's a child or a spouse or anyone in your family, just having an art practice is so, so important and like can really help. Art can help. The new band, Suzzallo, it's all about catharsis and it's all about expressing what you've been through. So for me, that just really it opened a channel for everything I needed to get out of my heart and soul that I think if you don't express that kind of pain, it just would have killed me.
Yeah.
So I'm really grateful that I had an art practice. I encourage anybody who's going through that to try it.
A lot of people picture grief as being a situational, temporary thing that's going to pass. And with depression, like I live with bipolar, so depression is a huge part of that.
Sure.
Yes, the moods pass, and yes, the depression does lift, but it's always there. And I'm wondering about how do you see your grief carrying forward in your life? What's your hope for that?
That's a great question, Jason. Yeah, I've thought a lot about it because when something like this happens, you're always wondering, oh my gosh, am I going to be like this forever? And one of the things my grief therapist told me like early on was that you're never really going to get over this. It's not something that ever really just goes away. You're going to carry this the rest of your life. I think when you lose a child, it's in another category essentially than losing someone like your grandma or your mom. I mean, it's still grief, and all grief is valid in its own way. But most people say that this is kind of one of the hardest experiences you can have as a human and as a parent. The grief doesn't ever go away, but you do get better at carrying it. That's where the hope lies for me. That's important for me to share that with people because I have felt a lot of resilience, a lot of gratitude for my community coming together to support me. And that's another thing my counselor said is like, it's a real litmus of whether people do recover or not, is if they have a community of support around them and how well they're able to accept help from that community. And I think there's beauty in that. But I think it's kind of like a container, and the grief at first is filling the entire container and your life just feels like you can't function. But eventually the container grows and you can still hold the grief along with your life better. I think that analogy of basically you just get stronger at carrying this weight. I don't know if that's been part of your experience with the bipolar. It's like you just start to learn how to have tools to deal with this thing that's going to be there with you on your journey now.
Yeah.
I found a lot of strength and hope in that, and it's totally been true. I do feel like I've gotten stronger. Just because somebody carries it well doesn't mean it's not heavy,
Yeah.
It's like you're not out of pain. You just get better at carrying it. And then in some ways you also find, depending on how deep you go with it, like the way your relationship to the person that passed completely changes. So there's also moments of joy and a recognition that that love is still there and the relationship changes and the way you can experience your love for that human.
I love that analogy of the container. It's funny how we can learn such huge lessons from those little analogies.
Yeah, it's true.
I love that, and I think that it was like that. It is like that for me. When things first happened, there was no room for anything
Sure.
but the mood
Yeah.
episodes, and now I do have that room, and they're there still, like you said. But you talked about, being on the floor and crying. Well, yeah, that's where I started out to get to where I am now. It's just, anyways, it's a great analogy.
You develop a toolbox,
Hmm.
right? Like a way you can deal with what you're going through. That's been huge for me. Just trying to keep it simple and break it down to the things I can do that can help me cope with this extreme grief. And one of the first things that my niece actually told me right after Keenan passed was grief is just love with nowhere to go.
Yeah.
And I think that's been for me, sorry, it's a little hard to talk about sometimes, but that concept and that idea is really beautiful, especially back to what we were talking about earlier with art. I really feel like if you find a place to put it, it's so helpful. Being able to have an art practice, whether it's music or painting or whatever you're doing, just some way to express.
How old's your niece?
Oh, she's 22 now, basically right around the same age as Keenan. And
That's pretty poignant.
yeah,
Words of wisdom. We sometimes discredit youth in some ways with their experiences, and from the experiences I've had with youth, there's a lot there, and like
oh
in some
man,
cases more than for adults. Yeah.
totally agree. Yeah, it kind of doesn't matter if somebody's what their level of experience is. If they have wisdom from their life, then it's valuable.
So the podcast is called Scream Therapy, and so it was
Uh-huh.
mentioned that you were doing some primal screaming as grief recovery, and I wasn't sure if that was just like
Yeah.
being in a band and screaming in the basement, or whether you actually did that with a counselor, or
I didn't do it formally with someone who teaches scream therapy, but I did talk to my grief counselor about it, and I did it. It wasn't a formal thing, but I did actually do it as a practice
Mhm.
for myself. It went on for many months. I had Googled about it. I learned about it from John Lennon, actually. I was watching interviews with John Lennon, and just got really interested in how it really helps people. And especially when you've had this kind of experience, when Keenan passed, my identity was completely shattered. I didn't relate to the world in the same way. And I felt like, there was a deep primal rage. Like a lot of the ways it manifested for me was this anger. It was like incredible anger and this fiery rage that I needed to express in some way. It definitely wasn't good for my throat at the time, but I just started screaming into a pillow till I was exhausted. I would just scream as hard and as long as I could into a pillow, and I would feel a relief afterwards. I guess the word primal comes to mind because it feels almost like a wild animal or something.
Yeah,
When you lose your child like that, it's like you're just cast into an underworld. Anguish is the only word that really kind of gets to describing something that's totally indescribable. That's the experience of that. And so you need a more intense way to get that out, to get that energy out of your body. I used that and it worked well for me.
nice.
Probably not for everybody, but I really got a lot from doing that.
And you were doing that when you were in your teens and early adulthood, screaming on
It's
stage, and
true in some way, yeah. Never so focused and intense as that. But I think that plays back into our conversation from before too, that like being in a band or in a loud band or playing music, it really can just open a channel for you to express what you need to say, just be able to deal with your life. I always thought of music as therapy for me, and I never understood exactly what was going on until I was much older.
yeah,
I thought, oh, I'm playing music, but now I realize, oh, I was actually just trying to figure out life and finding a way to have a therapy for myself to just deal with all the pain and trauma of the way I grew up. I mean, I grew up in a pretty abusive household, and it was very chaotic. We were super poor in Texas, and My dad was a criminal in a biker gang, and I just had like a pretty violent upbringing. So
Hmm.
it was not till I moved up to Seattle that my mom remarried and things started to kind of chill out in my personal life more, and I could just focus on my craft and working on songwriting. And I realized that's what was going on the whole time. Now I feel a lot more intentional about that, and I'm also able to just express. And it's interesting because Suzzallo is, yes, it's sad in subject matter, but it's really full of joy and expression, and it's really fun music.
Cardboard copy paper box, flight jacket and old notebooks, pieces of a life that was scattered up above.
For me, I think that's kind of a gift out of this, is that I'm able to make music, and I'm super grateful for that and what that has done for me in terms of my grief healing journey.
Yeah, I was going to say that album is the perfect balance between hope and reflection.
Thanks, Jason. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's heavy. Yeah, there's
Right.
times where I was tearing up, and it's heavy. It's a heavy record because of what happened to Keenan and because of your experience. And all those experiences seem to be channeled into that record. I don't want to call it a theme record, but
Yeah, it is kind of concept record almost, right?
yeah, it's got this feeling of forward momentum. And a lot of records about depressing or really sad things can feel a bit stagnant.
Totally. Yeah, I very much wanted to avoid that.
One of the things that I really thought was effective and cool and heartbreaking was the screams that you put into different songs, somewhere near the very end of the songs.
Mm,
And that was the part of the record that was just like, here's the dark part. Here's the
right.
really heavy, depressing part. But it's got to be expelled somewhere because how can you not have that?
Right. I agree with you. Like that was super important to me in those songs, just be able to express that. It's kind of one of those things where if people know me, if they know my history at all, if they listen to my last full-length solo album, they see the massive difference. It's kind of unexpected that I would be making this kind of record. That goes back to, I guess, just this experience, just completely changing the trajectory of where I'm going as an artist. I always wanted my art to reflect what was happening with me in my life. And I no longer related to the acoustic guitar or to like soft songs. I
Mhm.
just couldn't do it anymore. And I barely played any shows for the Rocky thing, which is my main source of income and my main, career in life. So that was another hard transition, is I basically just I had to stop that because I felt like I needed to keep my artistic integrity and just say, hey, I don't feel like doing this. Yeah, I could do this for money, but I have to honor myself, and I'm changing and I'm transitioning into this other person essentially in this other project, which is Suzzallo. There's like this fire breathing dragon energy. I just needed a louder sound.
When I was in a crisis, and I also feel like I had a head trauma after the psychotic break that I had, I just collapsed on the couch, listened to music. And one of the things that I found is that I did go back to the bands that I was into when I was a kid. I almost traced back my whole life with punk rock because punk
Nice.
rock had always been my salvation and my place to feel like I was myself and that I could be myself. Did you listen to music after Keenan died? Were you able to go back to that at some point?
I did. I had such a similar experience. Thanks for sharing that. That's beautiful. I love that for you, Jason, that it helped in that way. Because that's totally what it did for me. I had the same kind of thing. I felt like a kid again
Mm.
after Keenan died. I couldn't listen to anything that didn't have substance, anything that wasn't real. When you have this grief experience or something traumatic like what you went through, all that falls away. And so I think you have, a time where you can see art more clearly. I was drawn back to all the stuff I loved in the 90s and the post punk and hardcore stuff in the 2000s through the mid 2000s, whatever. Like that's the stuff I was really drawn to. And it was very expressive. And, I listened to a lot of At the Drive-In because I think his scream, that was comforting to me. That sounded like how I felt. I listened to Zach De La Roca and like Inside Out a lot. I love his early work with that band. and, just a bunch of hardcore records. And it was a pretty clean break and kind of departure from where I was musically, because I was really doing a lot of folk and acoustic and really focused on harmonies and beauty and like a lot of just like really singer-songwriter oriented art. And so my last album they were all really quiet folk songs dedicated to family members. Wild Roots, which was my last solo album. But I was just like, I can't have any of that now. I need something like really loud. And I listened to a lot of Jawbreaker and just stuff from that time.
Where do you see your expression in music going now that you've put out a lot of quieter records? This one's a loud record. How has your art changed? How has your process changed?
Yeah, it's changed so much. And I feel like I definitely am going to keep going in the same direction. I'm having so much fun with the band. We just played our first show and it was awesome. There's something when I play with these guys, there's a lot of really good chemistry between us and we're deep friends. These are people who were there with me through this experience and just helped me through it. And it's a lot of part of the reason why we ended up playing the band. I needed people I felt super safe with. And Rudy and I have been playing music together, as you know, because you came to the Waxwing shows back in the day, but
Yeah.
we've been playing music together for over 20 years.
Make my arrows too straight. Tired of all the shots it missed. It's one thing that I won't miss. Betrayal in a kiss. In a kiss. Jack.
And Steve and I have been friends for 15 years and are very close. And so on that personal connection level, I knew these guys would be great. But also musically, they're both, I mean, Rudy's one of the best drummers in Seattle and probably the best drummer I've ever played with. So we're going to continue to head in that direction. And we've already started working on LP2 a little bit. And, I've just got a bunch of ideas and it's still coming out of this wellspring of grief and how much pain I was in. But also just like I was saying before, how you continue to carry that and you still have other things in your life that you need to express. And I decided I'm never going to not have that channel. When Waxwing broke up, I very much regretted it because I had always written softer songs for the solo thing. And then I also had Waxwing as a channel of expression for louder ideas. And I kind of abandoned that. I think in some ways abandoned myself. And I've come back to the realization that this is my real dream. I like the songwriter stuff and it's fine, but it all sounds a little bit too saccharine or too, I don't know what the word is, but for right now, for me, it's not what works for me. I just can't really play softer music. I need something that is more expressive and louder. And so I'm going to keep going down that road and finding new guitar tones. And
Nice. The louder music gives you that blanket.
yeah.
Maybe having that blanket is helpful at this point for you.
Yeah. And maybe someday it'll come back for me that I like to play softer music. But I made a conscious choice to have no acoustic guitar on the album.
Yeah.
There is actually one, probably 10-second part on a song.
That was enough. Just wanted to take a minute before we finish, Rocky, and I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about Keenan.
Sure. Oh, yeah. Thank you so much for asking. I read this quote somewhere where it said, be the things you loved most about the ones you've lost. And so when it comes to Keenan, they were just such a sweet, kind, loving human and gentle and just so compassionate. And I've tried as best I can since Keenan's passed to embody that. I feel like I learned so much from them as a human while I was able to have the honor of being their dad. For 22 years, they never got mad. We never had an argument. They never got upset with me or angry at me, which I wasn't that good a dad. I mean, I made a lot of mistakes. I just a normal human being. We had normal ups and downs in our relationship, but Keenan was very special in that they held this space of kindness and gentleness for everyone around them. And when they passed, it was beautiful to see in the community so many people. There were 200 people at the memorial we had. What I believe from a spiritual perspective, even, that when you go through experiences like that, things open up on a deeper level if you're open to them. And I feel like one of the biggest things I've learned is just that that kindness that Keenan really exemplified in their life is really the point of life. It's a beautiful thing. Like, to love the people around you, to be good to the people around you. That's the most important thing, you know? And I saw this other quote: no matter how cool you think you are, no matter how much money you think you have, or you do have, or power, or whatever, how you treat people is how you're going to be defined. That's what's going to define you in the end of your life. And Keenan was really a good person.
I'll be keeping you here with me always.
That was my conversation with Rocky Votolato, rockyvotolato.com. For more episodes of Screen Therapy, go to screentherapyhq.com or wherever you listen to podcasts. Big news, the Screen Therapy book is available now. Screen Therapy, A Punk Journey Through Mental Health, tells my story and the stories of others who use punk as a catalyst for mental health. Like this podcast, it links the community-minded punk scene with the mental wellness of the punks who belong to it. To order the book, go to screentherapyhq.com. For merch, check out Screen Therapy on TeePublic. Okay, enough promoting. It's time for some thanking. Thank you for listening to Screen Therapy. Doing this podcast and talking to folks about punk rock and mental health has been a crucial part of my own mental stability, and it means so much to me that you're out there listening. Screen Therapy is created in the Quartet region of coastal British Columbia, Canada, on the traditional territory of the Tla'amin Nation. Contact me at screentherapyhq.com or email me at screentherapypodcast@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. Let's talk about punk rock and mental health. Until next time, take care and be well.